Hello and welcome. My name is John Hodsma. I'm on the TIP team at CMAP. This is session 4, and session 4 is a continuation of session 3 on carryover. In session 4, you'll learn how you can use different reports within the new eTIP platform to help plan and execute carrying over projects you are responsible for. You'll learn how to use the reports tab as part of your carryover workflow. And then finally, we'll look over additional project examples. So first, if we move to the reports tab up in the top, we can move to the reports section. We'll be going through 3 reports. The first will be the project list report. The second will be the program summary by fund report. And the third will be the fiscal constraint summary report. All 3 of these can be useful for carryover in that it centralizes all your projects that need action, and it identifies that universe of projects that need a review for carryover. And in organizing efforts for carryover, it assesses what actions a project needs from a program's perspective. Any change you make to a project, such as changing the federal fiscal year from one to another, has implications from a program of projects perspective. So it's important to use these reports to see how the changes you make will impact your program as a whole. And in that vein, using these reports will help you manage constraint implications. As a reminder, the TIP always has to be fiscally constrained. So knowing whether there's available funding in a different federal fiscal year is going to be critical. So getting into it, the project list report is one that generates a list of projects with their associated program funds by federal fiscal year, phase, and source. If we want to know all the PACE projects using FTA 5307 funds, we could use this report to do that. So under plan cycle, we'd select the 25 to 29 TIP year. Under lead agency, we'd select PACE. And for funding, in the funding type, we'd select FTA 5307. And now we can go ahead and generate the report. And you can see that it generates a list of 20 projects, PACE projects, using FTA 5307. If we scroll along these columns, you can see at the top, it's a lot of project information. And then it shows us program funds by federal fiscal year. It also shows us the source of the funds on the project, whether it's federal, state, or local. And finally, it shows us the funding that's programmed by phase. So because this is PACE, a lot of it's under implementation. Another useful column here is the plan revision column for carryover specifically. And what this can do is, if we filter all the 25-00 amendments to the top, this can just tell us that there has not been project activity on any of these projects, on most of these projects listed in federal fiscal year 2025. And that can just be helpful in gaining an understanding before we go into the projects to review them. Now, we can also use this to identify and sort by the projects by certain columns. One of those that you'll probably use a fair amount is by federal fiscal year. So you can see by sorting by 2025, we can see that there's 3 projects with FTA 5307 funds in 2025. We could also do the same thing by phase. So if we want to know the projects that have engineering funding programmed on them, we could see that there's 2 of them. We could also add additional fields to help achieve what we're looking to get out of these reports. So since this is a PACE report, we might want to add the FTA grant number, which we could select here. We might also want to know the RTA Schedule 2B report, which we can also select. We can update the report, and now you can see it gives us the FTA number and the RTA Schedule 2B number. We can also download this report into an Excel sheet, and that allows us to modify the information and the data, add further information if we would like. And we can also use this report to click into specific projects. So if we want to know more about the 71801 project, we could click into it, and we can see this is the Paul Stemser line. And unlike the old platform where the reports were a little more static, these are interactive, so we can go ahead and amend the project directly from this project page that we pulled up from the report. And that's going to be critical in how we can use these reports as part of your workflow for carryover, which we'll get into a little later here in this session. We'll next look at a different report. We'll move on to the program summary by fund, which is down this next section under summary reports. And this is a report that generates the amount of program funds in each federal fiscal year. You can also generate a list of projects by clicking into the fund source, which I'll show you how to do here in just a second. As an example, let's say we wanted to know all the fund sources that Metra is using. To do that, we go ahead and select the correct plan cycle that we want to look at. So in this case, we'll use 25 to 29. For the lead agency, we'll go ahead and select Metra. And for fund source, we want to see all of them, so we're not going to drill down on that, but we could. We'll generate that report. And now we can see here in the far left column under fund type, all the sources of funds that Metra has funds programmed on. So you can see there's CMAQ funding, and there's also FTA 5307 funding. So for example, if we want to know more about the 5307 funds, we click into it and see all the projects, Metra projects that have FTA 5307 funds programmed on them. And you can see down here, it gives us the list of the amount number of them, which is 71 projects. We can also do that same type of sorting by selecting 25. Or if we wanted to go by plan revision, we could also toggle on by plan revision. And just to give one other example, let's look at North Central's STP projects. So again, we'd select the correct tip cycle. For lead agency, we'd select North Central. And for funding type, since we know we want to look at STP, let's go ahead and select STP. We can go ahead and generate that report. And we can see that in 2025, North Central Council in their STP program has just north of $10 million programmed. In 26, they have about 4 million, and so on and so forth. So this can be a good way for a council to come in and look at their STP program and how much funding they have within it. And again, you can click into it to view that list of projects and toggle on certain years with which funding you want to see first. You can also, again, click into that project to view it within the project page. Now, the third report is the fiscal constraint summary, and this report builds upon the program summary. This report also gives you the programmed amounts in a given federal fiscal year, but it also gives you your mark or your revenue for that given year. It then subtracts that mark by the programmed amount to give you a balance in each federal fiscal year. So as an example, if we wanted to look at McHenry Council's STP program, we could do that by selecting the 2529 tip. And unique to this report is going to ask for a revenue scenario. And when you click into this, there'll be options based off your council or your agency. For now, we only are seeing McHenry, so we'll select McHenry. For lead agency, we'll select, again, McHenry Council. And under funding type, we'll go ahead and select STP. The additional fields can also be used, and we're going to add in AC and ACCP, because that can be a helpful determination when trying to figure out where a project is at. We'll generate that report. And again, here you can see that it gives that revenue for a year, gives the programmed amount, and then it gives the balance for each fiscal year within the TIP years. You'll see that there's a lot of red in the balances, and that's because in 2025, McHenry Council is over-programmed. Now, because you see this carryover over in the filters as carryover is toggled on, that remaining balance gets pulled over into 26 and gets subtracted from the revenue amount. And that has a trickle-down effect in that McHenry Council is not back into, does not have a positive balance until 2029. But if we turn this off and update the report, we'll see that it's only 2025 where they are over-programmed. In 26, they have more revenue than they have programmed, and same with 27, 28, and 29. So this carryover toggle is going to be important when you're running this report. And again, we can click into this and view the projects within their program. And in this scenario, we'll go ahead and download the Excel report and work with an Excel sheet a little bit, and to show you how you can use this Excel sheet for carryover. So one of the things I normally like to do is just put a filter on all the data that we're working with. I might also add a column where I can add some comments for the changes that we might want to make. I might also filter initially on 2025. So now we can see all the amounts in 2025 are showing up first. You can also see that the totals amount got pulled in. I'm just going to delete that for now. And I'll add in, to make this more dynamic, I'll add in my own totals for each fiscal year. I might call this program total. And then I'll pull this across. And we also have this AC and ACCP column here, which can be helpful in making some early determinations on where a project is at. So, for example, if we just wanted to see projects that are in AC, we could select that. And we can see there's 2 projects in 25 that have a phase that's in AC. Because we know any phase that has AC on it will need to be moved over into the new, during carryover into the new TIP years, we know for sure that this will likely need to be carried over. So we might say carry over. And same here. We can also see, as an example, this project here that I have highlighted. It has no funds in the current or future TIP years. All of the funds are in prior years. However, some of those funds in the prior years are still in AC. Until those get converted to ACCP, this project will need to be carried over. We can also use this in different ways as well. So if we looked at just the ACCPs, projects with ACCP phases, we can see that a lot of these projects have no funding in the current or future TIP years. All of it is in prior years. And there's no, these projects also don't have any phases that are still in AC. All of them have been converted. So these are just projects that are being expended down. So these would be good examples of where in carryover, we'd want to go and check the amount that these projects have been expended to determine whether they can be marked as completed or if they should be carried over. And then finally, projects that have neither AC or ACCP, so that'd be projects that just have NA, that can be useful for us in determining if the funding needs to move to a different federal fiscal year, specifically in 25. If the project's not going to use the funding in 25, it needs to be moved to a later TIP year. And since it's not an AC, we know that there's a high likelihood that we're going to need to move this funding to a different TIP year. And we want to know for sure that we have available funding in one of these years to move it to. So we might also add in our mark or our revenue down at the bottom and subtract it from the amount that's programmed to understand how much available funds there are in each of these years. And we would use the TIP to determine that mark. In the case of this training, just to keep things moving along, we will assume that McHenry mark is $7 million from 25 to 29. So we would type in 7 million. We'll take that across. And then finally, the balance down here. We take the mark, subtract it against the program total to give us our balance. And again, we can take that across. So we can see here that in 26, there's just north of 2.2 million available funds. The three phases that we think we're going to need to move to a different fiscal year totals about $1.7 million. So we know we have room to fit each of these phases into 2026. And we can see that after we move those phases, there's still a little bit over $500,000 remaining in 26. And then we might add in the comments that we need to move funding from 25 to 26. And we might copy that over to the other sources. So now, just in those quick filters, we have a good idea of what needs to happen on some of these projects. So now let's go in and make some of these changes for these three funds that we want to move from 25 to 26. If we go back to the eTIP, we can use this report that we initially ran to select into the projects and start that carryover process. So the first one let's look at is 11/24/16. We can go ahead and select into 11/24/16. And there's two initial things I typically do with each project, and that's going down first to the funding table to see what's happening. And second is going to the obligation tab to see what activity is going on there. In this case, we can see, if we scroll over, that this project has its construction funding in MYB. In 25, it has STP local programmed under engineering, and in 28, it has engineering 2 funding. If we go over to the obligation tab, there's no project activity, and that makes sense considering it didn't have an authorization or an AC in that spreadsheet we looked at. If it did have an AC authorization, we would see that. We'd see some information here describing that, outlining that. So now we can go ahead and amend the project and move that funding from 25 to 26 and move the project from 25 to 29 to the 26 to 30 tip. And again, to do that under the change reason detail, we'll select other schedule change described below. For the description, we'll put carryover. And now it will allow us to make that change. So we can go down, change the STP funding to 26. And we also want to make sure the local funds attached to it also get moved to 26. The second thing we'll want to do is update the completion year. This is blank currently, and since all the funding was in MYB for construction, we might say this isn't going to be open to traffic, or it's not going to be completed until 2030. We'd also go through and review each tab and making sure it's mapped, checking the IDs that they're correct, answering the project questions. And in this case, I might also go to the schedule info because I know that engineering 1 phase is no longer happening in 25. You can see here that initially they have marked it as January 25. So maybe we'd reach out to the project sponsor and now they say it's January 26. So we'd update that. We'll go ahead and save it. And we can finally submit for review. All right, so if we go back to our spreadsheet, we can say, we might indicate that we submitted 11/24/16. Maybe give it some color on the screen. And now let's go ahead and look at 11/20/15, this next one right here. So we'll go back into the platform and we'll find 11/20/15 and open it up. Again, we want to look at the funding table and then the obligation tab to get a sense of project activity. So if we scroll over, we can see that this project has construction and construction engineering in 25 using STP local. It has local funds and toll credits as a match for both phases. And finally, it also has STP shared fund, and that is through using planned use of redistribution. Now, is the councils using STP? No, you are not able to carry planned use of redistribution into 26. So if it's not being used in 25, this will need to be changed back to STP local. If we go over the obligation tab, we can see there's no project activity. So now we can confirm that the funding in 25 needs to be moved over to 26. So we'll go ahead, click amend project, select the 26 to 30 plan cycle on the 26-00 revision. We'll select other schedule change described below and select carryover. We can go down and change these fund sources to 26. And again, we can move it to 26 because we know we have available funding in that year. And we want to make sure all the local match funding also gets moved with it. And finally, we will change this back to STP local. We'll remove this section to blank and we'll move it over to 26. If I was doing this tip change for real, I might add this 108 back into the STP local amount, but for the purpose of this training, I'll leave it out. And then like last time, we'll want to go and update the completion year. So since the construction got pushed out, we might say 2026. We'll want to review all the other information, including these tabs. Again, I'll go to schedule info And you can see here that it has the construction letting date marked as September 25. We know that's not going to happen anymore, so we might reach out to the sponsor, ask them what the new target letting date is, and maybe they say it's, again, January 26. So we'd update this here, click Save. And then we can go ahead and submit for review. We can go back to our spreadsheet, mark that we looked at 11/2015 and moved it over into the new tip. And finally, let's look at 11/21/11 here. So if we move back to the platform and find 11/21/11, I'll again go down to the funding table to get a sense of what's happening. And you can see that it has STP local funding in construction. And it also is using, again, planned use of redistribution like that last project, which it has some of it, 154 programmed under construction. So if this is not being used in 25, we'll have to move this back to STP local. When we go to the obligation tab, we can see that there is some project activity. And it looks like this project was authorized for AC for 1.5 million of AC in April of 2025. So what happened is that this likely got missed in April of 2025 and did not get updated in the tip. So we're going to want to go and update that now, and that does change things in that we won't want to move that construction funding to 26. We'll want to mark it as AC and leave it in 25. And that's why we also want to verify this information. We can gather what we think is going to happen within the spreadsheet, what the likely outcome is going to be, but we want to go into the project and verify it. So now when we go to amend project, we can select the 26 to 30 plan cycle on the 26 revision, select other change reason or other schedule change described below. We'll put carryover. And because we're also going to make a AC convert or a AC change, we want to select phases placed in AC status. We might say amend project. We can then go down to our funding table and within this ACCP column, we'll put that amount in AC. And again, if we were doing this for real, we would want to change this amount to what was actually authorized. So that's 1.5 million. We take that remaining $45,000 and put it on a separate line item. And then with the STP shared fund planned use of redistribution, we'd want to change this back to STP local. And we might also reach out to the project sponsor to see if they actually need this additional funding beyond the 1.5 million that was authorized. And while we wait for it, again, if you're waiting for a response from a project sponsor, you can go ahead and move this as long as you have room in your program to 2026. And then because we swap the fund sources from STP shared fund to STP local, we'll also want to add in a change reason that's add, delete, or change fund source. And like the other projects, we also need to add the completion year. So since this went into letting in April of 2025, we might say it's going to get completed in 26. We'd go through, check each of these tabs, make sure they're up to date and that they're accurate, and then we can go ahead and save changes. And then submit for review. So now if we go back to our spreadsheet, we can say we looked at that and we've taken care of the three changes, the three remaining amounts that were in 25 that we didn't think had been authorized that we thought we were going to move over 26. We took care of those. Two of those we moved over 26, and one of them had actually had an AC authorization. Let's look at one more, and we will look at one of those projects where all the funding is in the prior years, and we were wondering whether it needed to be closed out and marked as completed or carried forward based off the expenditure amounts. So we'll go ahead and look at 11, 13, 16, this one right here. So let's go and find that project within the TIP. So we're back on the report we initially ran, and we find 11, 13, 16 and open it up. I'll still walk through the same process and going down to the funding table to get a sense of what's going on. So we can see they had STP local back in 2022 that they used for construction. And now if we go over to the obligation tab, we can see that this new feature being used, which is the bar chart, and you can see the obligated amount was 1.5. And then we can see the expended amount, which is also 1.5, which means this project has been fully expended and is likely ready to be marked as completed. If we want more confirmation, we could even scroll down to this accounting history, which shows when the project was authorized for AC and when that AC amount was obligated. And then finally, when expenditures started to happen. So it went into AC in September of 2021. Expenditures started in April of 2022. And the final, most recent expenditure was in October 2022. So there's been no activity on this project in nearly 3 years. So that tells us this project can be marked as completed. To mark it as completed, we still have to put it on the carryover amendment. So we'll go ahead and amend the project, going through the same process of 26 to 30, 26-00. This time around, instead of selecting the project changed, we are going to select the project completed. Under the change reason, you can either put carryover or you can put project completed. Select amend project. And even on this project, we are still going to need to update the completion year to be able to submit this. And for this project, since it's already been completed, we can put before 2025 as the completion year. There's nothing else we need to do to this project. We still might go through each project tab to make sure it's all good. We can save changes and then submit the project. Now, if we wanted to go and find these projects we just submitted, there's a couple different ways we could go about it. The first is we could go to the dashboard, and under the select plan, under the right plan cycle, which in this case would be 26 to 2030, we could go and see them here. The other way is you go to projects, and sometimes, depending on what you have selected, you might find yourself with the 25 to 29 plan cycle selected, and you can see no projects come up under pending review. But we know we just submitted 4 different projects, so we should be seeing something. So that's a sign you need to go over the plan cycle and just update what you have selected. So if we turn on the 26 to 30 plan cycle and update it, we'll finally see our 4 projects we submitted. And now if you submitted a project and then a day later realized you needed to change something about it, you could still go into that project, unsubmit it, go ahead and edit it, and say that for this one, let's say this was actually, not 26, we need to move to 27. We'd go in and update 27. We'd save the changes. And then again, resubmit for review. The same thing can happen for denials. So if CMAP staff denies something, you'll have to toggle over to the denied section. You can see that the pending review doesn't automatically get turned off, so you have to go over and click it again to just get the denials. And then you could go in and respond to the denial here. That is it for session 4. Again, some keys for success: start carryover early, make the changes with a plan. So utilize those report sections, those reports to develop a plan for carryover and assess where your projects are at and what actions they need. And finally, don't wait to respond to denials from CMAP staff. The sooner you can get those taken care of, the better, and the easier carryover will be for all of us. If you have any questions, please reach out to CMAP staff.